Imagine standing on the dusty plains of ancient Sparta. The air is filled with the metallic clash of bronze shields, the thunderous rhythm of marching feet, and the low chant of soldiers preparing for war. In the distance, the faint cries of newborns pierce the night, some destined to be molded into warriors, others abandoned to the mountainside. This was no ordinary city. This was a society that lived and breathed for war, and it paid any price to maintain its army of so-called super soldiers. For centuries, the Spartans have been celebrated as the ultimate warriors of the ancient world, champions of discipline, courage, and unbreakable strength. Films, textbooks, and even modern political movements have romanticized them as paragons of honor. But beneath that polished image lies a disturbing reality, a reality many ancient writers ignored, glossed over, or even glorified. Plutarch, for example, praised Sparta's strict system of law and training, but rarely questioned the cruelty at its core. Other sources, like Xenophon, admired their discipline without daring to condemn their methods. What these accounts omit, or disguise, tells us just as much as what they record. Tonight, we pull back the curtain on the darker truth. Behind Sparta's legendary warriors was a system of state-controlled breeding rituals, ruthless child selection, and calculated manipulation of human lives, all in the name of military supremacy. Practices that modern eyes would call disturbing, even monstrous, were once justified as necessary for the survival of the Spartan state. And so we must ask, what if the foundation of Spartan greatness was built not on honor, but on cruelty, manipulation, and the control of human life itself? To understand the disturbing rituals at the heart of Spartan life, we must first step into the world of Sparta itself, a city unlike any other in ancient Greece. Between the 7th and 5th centuries BCE, Sparta rose to dominance not through trade or philosophy, but through the sharp edge of its spears and the weight of its laws. Every element of society was designed to serve the state's single obsession, war. Sparta was ruled by an unusual dual kingship, two monarchs sharing power, one often leading armies while the other remained at home. Yet real authority lay in the rigid social structure that divided people into distinct classes. At the top stood the Spartiates, the warrior elite who alone enjoyed full citizenship. Below them were the Perioikoi, free but politically powerless artisans and traders. At the very bottom were the Helots, enslaved people often from conquered lands, forced to farm so the warriors could dedicate themselves to battle. It was a pyramid built on exploitation, with Spartan soldiers standing on the backs of those they oppressed. Ancient sources like Herodotus and Plutarch's lives portray Sparta as disciplined and heroic, but we must recognize their bias. Herodotus admired their valor against Persia, while Plutarch, writing centuries later, idealized their customs as models of virtue. What they present as order and strength often concealed systemic cruelty. Life was stripped to its bare essentials. Boys entered the agorge at age 7, torn from their families to endure brutal training, sparse meals, and ritual humiliation. Adults dined in austere mess halls, their currency forged from heavy iron to discourage wealth and luxury. Sparta thrived not on comfort, but on sacrifice. But how could such a society, so harsh and unforgiving, sustain its legendary military machine? At the core of Sparta's social experiment was a chilling belief. Human life was not sacred. It was a resource to be molded, tested, and discarded if unfit. The Spartan state institutionalized breeding as a matter of policy, seeking nothing less than the creation of a perfect warrior race. According to Plutarch's Life of Lycurgus, every newborn in Sparta was subjected to an official inspection. The infant was brought before a council of elders, who scrutinized its body for strength, symmetry, and health. If the child appeared frail or unworthy, it was not raised at all. Instead, it was carried to the wild slopes of Mount Taygetus and abandoned, left to die from exposure or the jaws of animals. Plutarch records this practice with admiration, as though it were a wise safeguard for the city's strength. But his glorifying tone reveals more about his own bias than about the moral cost of such a policy. He saw ruthless selection as virtue rather than cruelty. This was, in essence, a primitive form of state-run eugenics, centuries before the term was ever coined. The aim was not compassion nor family continuity, but the relentless pursuit of a stronger army. Infants were judged not as individuals with potential, but as tools to serve the state. Those who did not meet the harsh criteria were erased before they could even speak their first word. The message was unmistakable. In Sparta, the value of a citizen was measured by their utility to war. Love, nurture, and human dignity bowed to the iron will of the state. What society, we must ask, willingly builds its glory upon the corpses of its own children? If the inspection of infants was the beginning, the system only grew darker as Spartans aged. Marriage itself was not a private matter of love, but a state-controlled mechanism for breeding stronger warriors. Older men were often paired with younger women, under the assumption that such unions produced more vigorous offspring. And in some cases, husbands would ritualize wife-sharing, permitting or even arranging for another man considered stronger or more genetically desirable to impregnate their wives. It was a cold calculation, stripping intimacy from marriage and replacing it with the logic of livestock breeding. Meanwhile, boys entered the agoge at age 7. Taken from their families, they were thrust into a harsh environment of physical trials, ritual beatings, and enforced deprivation. They learned to steal food, but were punished not for theft, but for being caught. The program sought to erase personal identity, molding each boy into a faceless cog of the Spartan war machine. The ancient writer Xenophon, in his Constitution of the Lacedaemonians, praised this system for producing discipline and endurance. Yet, he offered little moral questioning. For him, efficiency was virtue, even if it came at the cost of childhood, family bonds, or basic compassion. And what of those left voiceless in this system? The Helot women, enslaved and often forced into reproductive roles, are almost entirely absent from the historical record. Their bodies were used, their stories erased, their humanity forgotten. The Spartan miracle, admired by so many later generations, demands a chilling reconsideration. Was it truly discipline and courage that built Sparta's legacy? Or was it in truth state-sponsored abuse disguised as virtue? The deeper we look into Sparta's social system, the darker it becomes. Beyond infant selection and controlled marriages lay a culture where ritual humiliation was woven into education. Young boys in the agoge were forced to endure public beatings, starvation, and degrading rites, tests designed not to nurture, but to break and remake them in the image of the state. Strength was prized, but compassion was deliberately crushed. Sparta also extended its grip over reproduction itself. Women, though granted unusual freedoms compared to other Greek city-states, were ultimately reduced to breeding vessels for the state. They were expected to maintain physical fitness not for themselves, but to bear strong children. In communal halls, pressure weighed heavily, their worth measured by the offspring they could deliver to Sparta's war machine. Some sources suggest that the agoge may have included pederastic relationships, where older men were paired with boys as mentors, or, more disturbingly, as sexual partners. Whether these were consensual bonds or coerced practices remains debated, but the possibility adds yet another layer of unease to Sparta's legacy. Later admirers of Sparta often suppressed or ignored these truths. Renaissance humanists praised Spartan discipline. 20th century fascist regimes glorified their racial purity while overlooking the cruelty that underpinned it. In this selective memory, brutality became heroism, and abuse was painted as strength. Close your eyes and imagine the silence of abandoned infants on the mountain, the cold, clinical rituals of inspection, the suffocating expectation in the communal halls. These were the sounds and silences that built the Spartan state, and so we must ask, is military greatness ever worth the human cost? For centuries, the legend of Sparta has gleamed with an almost mythic brilliance. We are told of the 300 at Thermopylae, of warriors who feared no enemy, of discipline unmatched in the ancient world. Yet behind that shining myth lies a grim reality, the systematic control of life itself, from the inspection of newborns to the state-sanctioned manipulation of marriage and reproduction. What the world admired as Spartan virtue was, in truth, a society built on the suffering of its most vulnerable. The broader lesson is sobering. When a state elevates power above humanity, cruelty ceases to shock. It becomes law, tradition, even celebrated as greatness. In Sparta, infanticide, humiliation, and the silencing of women and helots were justified in the name of survival. But survival at such a cost leaves behind not glory, but scars. As we reflect on these hidden truths, it is vital to condemn the practices that robbed countless individuals of dignity and life. The helot women forced into silence, the infants left to die, the children molded through fear. These were not symbols of strength, but victims of a brutal system. So we turn to you. What shocks you most about Sparta's hidden world? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe these forgotten stories deserve to be told, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more explorations of history's darkest chapters. The bronze shields of Sparta may have gleamed in the sun, but behind them lay shadows we cannot ignore. Ethical disclaimer: this video is for educational purposes only. We do not promote hatred or violence. These events are condemned.